We tend to think of space colonization as a one-way journey, a triumphant march of humanity into the stars, planting new roots that will endure for millennia. But history, even here on Earth, suggests otherwise. Civilizations rise and fall, cities flourish and crumble, and landscapes we once reshaped can be reclaimed by nature in the span of a single human lifetime. What would happen then if a space colony, painstakingly built on a distant world or inside a vast orbital habitat, were left to wither? Would it stand silent for eons, waiting for rediscovery? Or would it decay so quickly that future travelers might never guess it had been inhabited at all? Science fiction has long explored these ideas. Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, often hailed as one of the greatest sagas in the genre, imagines a galaxy-spanning empire stretched across tens of thousands of years. In the final book, Foundation and Earth, we encounter worlds that have slipped into obscurity, their populations dwindling, their ecosystems unraveling. Similarly, Frank Herbert's Dune universe, another titan of science fiction, ends in Chapterhouse Dune with a desperate and deliberate re-terraforming effort, reshaping a planet for a new purpose, ironically from lush garden world to desert. In both stories, Earth itself has become a long-lost radioactive wasteland, not through slow decay, but by deliberate destruction. This theme resonates because it feels plausible. We already envision Earth-like worlds in fiction succumbing to war, industrial ruin, or ecological collapse, and it's even easier to imagine such fragility when we consider planets whose life support systems weren't born there to begin with. A transplanted Earth ecology might seem robust, but nature is often a paradox, highly adaptable in some ways and shockingly sensitive in others. Even here on Earth, no ecosystem is truly permanent. Ancient forests can only be centuries old, replacing grasslands that themselves replace lakes or deserts, and before that another forest perhaps, but with a very different ecological composition and dynamics than the current forest. Life changes, recycles, and adapts, but not always in the ways we would prefer. And all of this on a world perfectly suited to that life. Imagine then a transplanted ecosystem trying to thrive on a planet with a 23-hour day, 2 moons, and a 500-day year. That's a dream scenario for settlement compared to most real candidates, and still, over decades or centuries, subtle differences in gravity, light cycles, and weather patterns could chip away at its stability. That's part of why I've often argued that purpose-built space habitats may be more reliable long-term homes for humanity than terraformed planets. A closed, engineered environment is easier to control than a whole world with its own complex climate engine. Still, we will terraform. Humans have never been able to resist the challenges of making inhospitable places livable. With enough technology, we can reshape even worlds worse than Venus or Mars, but no matter how advanced our tools, the possibility remains. Colonies fail. Worlds can unterraform, slowly reverting toward their natural state or collapsing into something entirely new. Space habitats certainly can as well, and we should assume in the absence of active technological maintenance, any planet or habitat that's not a perfect match for Earth will begin to unglue. And when that happens, we have to ask, is recovery possible? Can a dying colony be restored, or does it need to be abandoned entirely? Today we'll explore the full life cycle of space settlements, from their peaks to their possible decline, from the spark of recolonization to the long stretches where a planet waits in darkness. We'll consider the practicalities of restoration, the likelihood of resettlement, and how the rest of a star system might carry on even if its flagship colony falls silent. Why colonies fail. The most obvious cause of a colony's collapse, besides warfare, is environmental instability. On a terraformed world or large orbital habitat, life depends on a web of interconnected systems. Climate regulation, atmospheric balance, hydrology, agriculture that often have no precedent in nature. Even on Earth, agricultural civilizations have fallen when the soil was depleted, water ran dry, or pests and diseases spread beyond control. On an alien planet, the risks multiply. A small difference in sunlight, gravity, or seasonal cycles can slowly undermine an imported ecosystem. Crops might fail after decades of stable harvest. Pollinators may not adapt to subtle shifts in flowering times, or runaway algae blooms could choke oxygen levels in managed seas. Terraforming is not a set-and-forget process, it's a constant act of maintenance, and without vigilant oversight, environments can unravel. Now, terraforming is a process of likely at least a few thousand years, so once you complete, you probably do have a full human population of hundreds of millions, if not billions there, and likely heavily augmented by robots, though there's a decent chance a terraforming world is aiming at some idyllic techno-primitive state too. So I tend to think that terraforming was completed, as much as such a project can ever be completed, that a collapse is less likely. I think we are more likely to see it in the early centuries when you have a much more hostile and dead planet settled by far fewer people and with far fewer resources and safety margins. And probably on the fringes of settled space where help is harder to come by from neighbors. Or as we'll also consider today, if the planet had failed or been attacked, and now has been resettled by a neighboring star system with a colony mission reaching a planet already in a state of decay. And that's a reminder that not all failures come from nature. Human factors are at least as dangerous. Political collapse can cripple a settlement's ability to respond to crises, especially if it's part of a larger interstellar network. A change in leadership priorities, a power struggle, or even distant events in the parent civilization can leave a colony isolated and underfunded. Economic shifts can be equally lethal. If a colony's prosperity depends on a single export, rare minerals, luxury crops, or data processing, a change in galactic trade routes or new competition could pull the economic rug out from under them. War, whether fought directly on the colony's soil or in the spaceways that connect it, can leave infrastructure in ruins. And sabotage, whether political or ideological, could target key life support systems in ways more devastating than open battle. We can imagine not just some world getting itself nuked till it glowed in the dark, and with very few people and organisms surviving the onslaught, but also options like targeted bioweapons or hunter-killer drones simply coming after humans. Indeed, the latter might be considered more civilized by galactic societies who all grew up from ancestors who worked for generations to settle barren planets or build space habitats. Space colonies are also deeply vulnerable to disruptions in their supply chains. Even relatively self-sufficient worlds might often rely on off-world shipments for specialized goods, machine parts, certain medicines, imports of ice or solar shades at Lagrange points, or high-tech components that can't be locally manufactured yet. On an orbital habitat, the dependency can be absolute. A misdelivery of critical parts might mean failed recycling systems, or food shortages within weeks. If transport lanes become dangerous or uneconomical, supply interruptions could tip a struggling colony into collapse. Embargoes or more overt warfare could hammer a space habitat hard, leaving a damaged shell with a depleted population with a drained economy struggling to repair their homes. Finally, there's the slow decay of technology and skills. Maintaining a space habitat or a terraformed world requires not just the right machines, but the expertise to run and repair them. If knowledge is lost through generational drift, loss of educational infrastructure, the departure of skilled workers, or embracing some form of techno-primitivism, then even intact technology can become useless. In history, we've seen this with complex waterworks, shipyards, and manufacturing processes that vanished from use when the communities that understood them dwindled away. In space, the stakes are higher. A broken air recycler or atmospheric processor that no one knows how to fix is more than an inconvenience. It's a death sentence for the colony. On the one hand, this works strongly against them losing it, as they would know its vital nature and work hard to maintain it. But being aware of a vulnerability and becoming immune to it are two very separate things. These vulnerabilities often combine rather than occur in isolation. A minor ecological imbalance might spark political unrest, leading to a breakdown in trade, which in turn accelerates technological decay. In a system this interconnected, failure in one domain can cascade through the rest, turning a thriving settlement into an abandoned relic in surprising little time. Ecological collapse in non-Earth environments. Even if a colony never suffers political upheaval, trade disruption, or direct attack, its ecosystems can fail simply because it's not on Earth. Every factor we take for granted here, the length of the day and year, the patterns of the tides, the chemistry of oceans and soils, may be different enough to place long-term stress on transplanted life. A planet with slightly shorter day may force crops to adjust to altered circadian rhythms. An extra long year might compress growing seasons or create prolonged winters and summers that Earth organisms never evolved to handle. Moons can produce extreme or irregular tides, reshaping coastlines and mangrove systems, while different atmospheric compositions and soil chemistries could slowly leach vital nutrients or allow toxic compounds to accumulate. Even where adaptation could happen, you'll likely see not only more alien ecology, but a much more feeble one. Each deviation from Earth's baseline is a stressor, and while a robust life support system can mitigate them in the short term, centuries of compounded stress may erode stability until collapse becomes inevitable. It's important to distinguish between Earth-adapted life and a truly alien biosphere. An alien biosphere, even if superficially compatible with human life, will have had billions of years to develop complex, interlocking relationships between organisms and their environment. Earth life dropped into such a system is an invasive force, and while they'll struggle to compete with native organisms, or if it does succeed, may disrupt the existing balance catastrophically. By contrast, a terraformed world stocked with nothing but Earth species starts with a shallow ecology, one assembled by human design rather than natural evolution. While this may allow tight control in the beginning, the lack of depth and redundancy can make it far more vulnerable to shocks. Lose one key pollinator or a single keystone species, and the entire constructed biosphere may unravel. History gives us sobering analogies. Some Earth ecosystems are incredibly resilient. Boreal forests can survive for millennia through repeated cycles of fire and regrowth, and coral reefs can rebound from storms given enough time. Others are astonishingly fragile. Collapse of the Newfoundland cod fishery in the 1990s happened just a few years after centuries of abundance, and some island ecosystems have been permanently altered or destroyed by the arrival of a single invasive species. The lesson reminds us that longevity does not equal invulnerability, and that stability can be an illusion maintained only so long as every part of the system remains in balance. In the context of a space colony, these dynamics are magnified. Terraformers may create a world that seems perfectly self-sustaining, but one subtle change in orbital tilt, atmospheric pressure, or microbial balance could ripple outward into cascading failures. Alien environments don't need to be hostile in the conventional sense to pose existential risks. They simply need to be different enough from Earth that our carefully transplanted ecosystems are always living on borrowed time. Case Study: Caliga 4 Oxygen Depletion. An instructive case can be found in the fate of Caliga 4, a once promising colony orbiting the dim red dwarf Barnard's star. The planet's atmosphere had been bulked up to near Earth oxygen levels, not through photosynthetic life, but via massive fission-powered metal production facilities. These plants, designed to churn oxygen-hungry ores and vent O2 as a product, ran around the clock for 2 centuries. Once the target oxygen concentration was reached, most of the plants were shut down to save resources, with only a few kept running for maintenance levels of replenishment. The system worked for a time, until the easy high-grade fissile deposits were exhausted. Barnard's star is 10 billion years old, and very little fissile material is left, and the planet is not very geologically active, with heavier elements rarer on the crust. Imports from nearby asteroid colonies dwindled as those too began to fail from the dependency on Caliga 4's trade and subsidy. Without ready access to cheap uranium and thorium, the remaining plants were running sparingly, then intermittently, as imported fuel became prohibitively expensive. The oxygen drawdown was slow enough to be ignored by most, but relentless. Every oxidizing rock formation, every outgassing volcano, every molecule of methane or hydrogen released into the air quietly eroded the breathable atmosphere. Tentatively established ecologies began to falter as animals became more sluggish and predator-prey cycles failed. Within 100 generations, high-altitude regions required supplemental oxygen, and by the 200th, much of the lowland population was gone, migrated, domed over, or dead. Caliga 4 never went airless, but its age of open-air cities is now a fading memory. Unterraforming: How a World Reverts or Mutates. When active maintenance of a terraformed planet ceases, the environment does not simply freeze in place. Instead, the intricate balance of systems begins to shift toward whatever configuration is most stable without constant intervention. This unterraforming process is shaped by the planet's natural geology, climate drivers, and the residual influence of whatever biological and atmospheric engineering has been done. In many cases, decay begins subtly. As we saw, oxygen levels may drop as reactive minerals pull it from the atmosphere. Oceans may absorb CO2 more rapidly without artificial circulation or buffering, and weather patterns may shift as solar shades, orbital mirrors, or climate control systems fall silent. These changes can seem minor at first, but because the entire biosphere was designed with specific tolerances in mind, even small deviations can push it into unfamiliar territory. Sometimes the decline is slow and incremental, unfolding over centuries or millennia. Forests give way to scrubland, seas become more acidic, and formerly temperate zones shift towards extremes of heat or cold. In other cases, the transition comes to a tipping point, a sudden collapse when one key system fails, an atmospheric process shutting down, a major ocean circulation change, or the loss of a keystone species can trigger cascades that rapidly transform the planet in decades rather than centuries. The end result is not necessarily a dead world. Left alone long enough, many planets will settle into new, stable states, environments that may be too harsh for humans but be perfectly viable for other forms of life. A once Earth-like garden could become a dusty, thin-aired savanna, or a sweltering greenhouse of alien-adapted flora and fauna. Some of these mutated ecologies may be rich and self-sustaining, just not in a form compatible with human habitation without renewed terraforming. In this way, unterraforming doesn't necessarily erase a world's history, it rewrites it, leaving behind a living record of both human intervention and nature's enduring power to adapt. Abandonment Timelines. The pace at which a colony's environment degrades after human departure depends on both the robustness of its system and the natural tendencies of the planet itself. On a world where geology, atmosphere, and biology are already near-Earth norms, degradation may take millennia. On one where climate control, oxygen generation, or large-scale water management are crucial, noticeable decline could begin in decades. Infrastructure also plays a decisive role. Automated systems may continue functioning for years or even centuries if they are well built and powered by renewable energy sources, slowing the rate of ecological change. Solar-powered atmospheric processors, orbital shades, or robotic pollinators could buy time for a biosphere to stabilize or for future settlers to return. However, without skilled oversight, even the most resilient systems will eventually fail. Materials fatigue, corrosion sets in, and software glitches accumulate. What survives longest in the absence of humans is often the smallest and most adaptable life. Microbial communities, hardy plant species, and opportunistic animals can persist through environmental swings that would wipe out more delicate ecosystems. These survivors may form the seed stock for whatever new ecological balances emerge in the centuries ahead. Orbital infrastructure can make a critical difference. If stations, mirrors, or asteroid-based industries remain intact and operational, they can continue to influence the planet below, shading it from excess heat, delivering occasional resources, or even maintaining partial environmental controls. In some cases, this might preserve pockets of habitability for far longer than the rest of the planet, creating scattered refuges of near-original conditions amidst a broader decline. In others, it might only slow the inevitable, stretching collapse over centuries instead of decades. Ultimately, the abandonment timeline is not a single countdown, but a series of overlapping ones. The lifespan of automated systems, the rate of geological and chemical shifts, and the ability of life to adapt. The interplay of these factors decides whether a colony's legacy is a world that fades quickly back to its pre-human state, or one that carries the mark of its human era far into the future. Case Study: Proxima b. The colony of Proxima b had been humanity's boldest experiment in planetary engineering, a tightly locked world where one hemisphere faced perpetual day under the dim red light of its parent star, and the other lay in eternal night. Early settlers ringed the planet with a network of orbital mirrors to warm the frozen dark side, and vast shades to cool the blistered day side. The plan was ambitious: stabilize the climate enough to make the entire globe habitable, turn the extremes into a world of gentle seas and green continents. But the work was far from finished when an ideological rift split the colony. A faction of idealists, believing the project was doomed or immoral, departed on a massive but mostly empty tithe ship bound for Earth, taking with them much of the skilled labor and some of the precious industrial capacity. as the ship had arrived full of resources but was departing without any of the expected raw materials to pay for the colony, there was little expectation of future ships arriving. While initially unified, the remaining settlers slowly divided into 3 bitterly competing blocks. On the day side, where the relentless heat threatened crops and cities, leaders demanded every available resource go into expanding the sunshade network to keep their lands from boiling. On the night side, where frozen oceans cracked and glaciers advanced, voices cried out for replacing the aging orbital mirrors to hold back the killing cold. In the narrow twilight band, a strip of land circling the planet's terminator, life could thrive without orbital intervention, as people argued that resources should be spent on expanding habitable zones there, rather than maintaining costly, failure-prone orbital megastructures. With no consensus, the orbital network began to wither. Maintenance flights became rarer, manufacturing backlogs grew, and debris strikes went unrepaired. Over the generations, the colony lost about 1% of its mirrors and shades each generation, a pace slow enough to feel tolerable in any one lifetime, but relentless on the scale of centuries. The day side saw creeping deserts advance, their sunshades failing to keep pace with rising temperatures. Night side settlements withdrew toward dwindling pockets of warmth, the frozen wastes claiming once viable domed cities. And in the twilight band, new towns flourished in the mild permanent dusk, feeding a quiet sense of vindication among its people. From orbit, Proxima B now glitters unevenly, the surviving mirrors and shades form a patchwork halo, their reflected light and shadows marking the scars of political division. The planet is not yet in full collapse, but the balance tips a little further each generation toward a world of extremes, where only a thin ribbon of twilight remains truly livable. We are seeing today just how easily a colonization effort might fail, and it is not too hard to imagine that civilization might periodically make a go at interstellar colonization, have some limited success, give up for a time, and watch those mostly end as failed colonies or marginal communities similar to some Arctic town, stable and self-sufficient but not planning on settling more worlds themselves. This is an example of a cyclic collapse, and we'll explore a variety of those in this month's Nebula exclusive, The Fermi Paradox, Civilization Extinction Cycles. I post a new episode on Nebula every month, and over the years, it's become home to more than 50 exclusives, extended editions, and bonus features from me and countless other creators. It's also where SFA episodes appear first, completely ad-free. As Halloween approaches, take advantage of riff tracks on Nebula, which features the same amazingly hilarious creators of MST3K, and enjoy Creature from the Haunted Sea and Giant Spider Invasion, both of which have just been released. Get a lifetime membership, normally $500 for just $300, by using my link, and enjoy all my exclusives and all Nebula originals for life. Go to go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur and unlock everything forever, or get an annual plan for 40% off, $36 a year. That's 12 months for the price of 7. Scan the QR code or click the link below to start watching now. Restoration and Resettlement. Recolonizing an abandoned world is both a romantic and practical ambition. From a distance, the appeal is obvious. Much of the initial work has already been done. The world itself is either a spoil of war or some tragic neighbor who left their dream a nightmare, but one you might correct. There may be surviving infrastructure, vast tracts of cleared land, even remnants of transplanted ecosystems that could be revived with the right inputs. For a civilization looking to expand, these worlds offer the promise of a head start. Yet every opportunity carries risk. Whatever caused the first collapse, ecological imbalance, social strife, economic failure, terraforming machines run amok, crazy mutant inhabitants may still be lurking. Without careful analysis, new settlers risk walking into the same trap, particularly if the decay has hidden its causes beneath centuries of change. In some cases, the original conditions cannot be fully replicated. Key machinery may be irreplaceable, or the original climate control network may have degraded past the point of repair. Economic and political motives may often drive recolonization. A resurgent empire may see the reclamation of lost worlds as a point of pride, or a corporate consortium may seek to profit from abandoned mines, habitats, or agricultural land. But approaches vary widely. Piecemeal patch jobs, repairing one dome, restarting one factory, can yield quick returns, but rarely addresses the deeper systemic issues. Full-scale re-terraforming offers more lasting stability, but requires the kind of resources and commitment few are willing to risk on a proven failure. Case study: Valhalla. Valhalla was a distant, cool world first settled by a religious community seeking isolation. New settler ships were dispatched regularly to the initial colony as converts and resources permitted. For decades they thrived, until a radical millenarian sect that had arrived in a recent ship unleashed a techno-organic plague engineered to target human biochemistry. The majority perished quickly. The survivors endured lasting and hereditary neurological damage, including heightened aggression and difficulty focusing on the technical skills needed to maintain their colony. Over time, their infrastructure crumbled, and the planet's half-formed, carefully managed ecosystem slipped into disarray. Back on Earth, the group that had been sending the stream of colony ships underwent a schism and was unable to send any more assistance for immigrants for some time. When a follow-up mission from Earth finally arrived generations later, they found a bleak scene. The once ambitious terraforming projects were in ruins. Farmlands had reverted to weedy scrub, and the few surviving communities were locked in cycles of violent conflict. To some, the devolved world better resembled their paradise than the more soft world they had been working to engineer, and schism set in again. Attempts at assistance faltered as newcomers faced not only ecological collapse, but deep social instability themselves. Valhalla remains a sobering example of how recolonization efforts can fail, not because the planet's challenges are insurmountable, but because the wounds left by its first collapse still shape every attempt to rebuild it. System-level context. Now, how realistic is all of this? After all, no colony exists in isolation. Even a single planetary settlement is part of a wider system, sharing space with moons, asteroids, comets, and perhaps orbital habitats. In many cases, the infrastructure that supports a planetary colony, mining stations, shipyards, power relays, is scattered throughout the system. These are also vulnerable to collapse, arguably much more so, but they represent additional eggs not in one basket, from which civilization and support can rehatch, and are a lot closer than Earth or the nearest well-established colony world. When a world fails, these outposts may persist for decades or centuries, continuing to function as independent communities, salvage operations, or trading posts for passing spacecraft. If that's all they do, then they will probably slowly wink out, one after another, but they join together and seek to grow and rekindle the lost world. They may likely succeed. We tend to expect space settlement of new systems to follow what we might call a backward pattern. Rather than starting with planets, civilizations first develop space-based infrastructure, mining asteroids for resources, building solar power stations, and erecting orbital habitats. Only after these networks mature do settlers attempt to colonize a planet with its deeper gravity well and greater terraforming needs. In such cases, the failure of a planetary colony does not necessarily doom the rest of the system. The space infrastructure may continue to thrive, eventually supporting a renewed planetary effort. Even a failed planet can retain value. In most cases, a world once abandoned will be easier to resettle than it was to settle in the first place, with remnants of the earlier efforts still in place and now surrounded by developed systems on every side, interested in new colony space close to home. Leftover weapons may complicate that equation. It is quite possible that even a brand new star system deploys a network of defensive satellites and installations, and equally likely they are not deactivated when a colony is abandoned. In fact, they may be contractually required to remain in place if the initial settlement was funded by an outside party who still wishes to control the territory. As for abandonment, as opposed to a total die-off, which is often the default in science fiction, this is actually quite plausible. Launching a massive colony arc is a monumental task, requiring vast amounts of equipment and a functioning ecosystem to sustain the voyage, but retreating to cryobunkers on the planet or in high orbit to await rescue is comparatively easy. Liquid nitrogen or oxygen is cheap and easy to produce, and low temperatures are simple to maintain in space. Many colonies would likely carry insurance or have rescue contracts in place to retrieve them if needed, and it is also probable that ships make periodic stops to pick up those wishing to return home. You might need a miles-wide and long O'Neill cylinder to take 100,000 people and a fledgling ecosystem to a new world, even with many things on ice or frozen embryos, but an even much smaller ship could take the entire modern human population and its pets and personal possessions. is not a very hard backup plan to enact, especially compared to the efforts needed for building worlds, and there's no rush on return. A few well-paid or well-motivated crew members could make the trip, load the corpuscles, send the ship back as a slow and low-energy crawl, and go on ice themselves. Speed on the trip back means little, as the world they are returning to was already massively changed by the time they arrived at their new colony, let alone retreated from it. Long-term patterns in a galactic civilization. In the grand sweep of galactic history, abandoned colonies are likely to be neither unique nor catastrophic. They are part of the normal ebb and flow of expansion, like ghost towns. Civilizations that span hundreds or thousands of worlds will inevitably have failures. Political shifts, economic downturns, environmental surprises, or sheer bad luck can doom individual settlements, even in an otherwise flourishing empire. Over long timescales, we might expect cycles of settlement, collapse, and revival. A world abandoned in one era may be resettled centuries later by a culture with better technology, different priorities, or greater tolerance for its hazards. Some colonies might experience multiple such cycles, each leaving layered traces in their ruins. Architecture from different eras, hybridized ecologies, even overlapping networks of ancient infrastructure repurposed again and again. As we looked at in our episode Megastructure Death, even if a habitat only needed a major overhaul once every 10,000 years, required to be evacuated for a decade, and sometimes they got extended to centuries of decay before it happened, that still means in a single star system, you might have 1 billion large space habitats in a state of abandonment and ruin at any given time, and indicating decay in your civilization no more than one abandoned house in a large town does. An entirely civilized and peaceful planet might go 100 generations without war or catastrophe, and need only 12 generations to erase that damage, but it still means a lot of abandoned or ruined worlds at any given time in a galaxy of 1 trillion planets. Some may be long abandoned too, but not forever, I think, even if whole armies had to descend on such a planet to clear out the automated murder machines left over from some calamity. These worlds become cultural as well as economic assets. To a later civilization, they can be archaeological treasures, preserving records of past languages, beliefs, and technologies. Legends and cautionary tales grow around them, shaping how future settlers approach their reclamation. In some cases, the memory of a failed colony can inspire renewed determination, a deliberate effort to succeed where our ancestors failed. In others, it serves as a warning, the site left untouched out of respect, superstition, or fear of repeating history. For a galaxy-spanning civilization, the number of active colonies at any given moment will likely far outstrip the number of failed ones, yet across the ages, those abandoned worlds will add up.